Okay, we're on now. All right. So
Woo woo.
yeah, the interesting in place to start here because like we obviously it's so funny. Like I think that the director's cut of Midsommar is actually out of theaters now. Probably I don't know if it's still in there, but I remember when that
Right.
came out and like we you and I just jumped right onto that. But yeah, like it's we've been a little late to the party getting this going here, but we're here now.
I think the
So
funny thing is it was only in theaters briefly, like maybe just for like 2 weekends at most.
yeah, that's why I jumped on it because like it was I remember seeing the trailer and it's like it's in theaters now and I was like holy crap I have to go now. So
Do you know what
uh,
made me laugh afterwards? I was looking up movies in the area and I didn't know this. Did you know that Spider-Man Far From Home had a director's cut in theaters or an extended cut or whatever? They
no,
re-released Spider-Man Far From Home in theaters as
seriously,
extended. Seriously.
what did they add?
I have no idea. I just saw it. I just saw it on. I think it was playing at the local theater, and I was just like, "Holy cow!" I hadn't seen any marketing about that. The fact that
I,
there was an extended version.
I
I
was
mean, I
about
know
to,
they did that with Avengers Endgame just so it could
yeah
like say like, "Hey, we kind of beat Avatars."
yeah
But I was surprised and I was like, "Holy cow!" Like Far From Home like made $1 billion. Why did they decide they needed to re-release it?
Yeah, I was about to say I haven't heard of any Marvel movie like getting a director's cut, like a definitive director's cut. That's really interesting. Yeah. So
Right. I mean, in reality, it probably wasn't really a director's cut. It was probably more than likely just a, hey, how can we make another $500 million over the next month or so?
true enough, because they can keep those in theaters for like freaking so long. But yeah. So
Right.
yeah. All right.
No, it's just funny how like we're talking about director's cuts today, but it seems like that model is slowly being used to make a little extra money for really big blockbuster movies.
Yeah. Really,
Of
Scott.
which neither movie we're talking about today is, if any sort, that kind of movie.
No, no, no. Yeah, like it's always good to see those like ones where you're like, yeah, the director cared about this one rather than like stuff like I rewatched Dawn of Justice and Suicide Squad. I think I told you about that, but like when you watch those movies, you're like, these are not like this isn't the director like making a better film. Like when you watch a Ridley Scott director's cut, you're like, yeah, this is a better version of a good film or like a decent film, which is like enriched by watching what the director originally wanted. But yeah, like when you watch some director's cuts, just like, dude, this is just a longer version of a movie which doesn't really have any difference. So,
Right.
all right, quick update here. I think I talked about this on the us debate that like we couldn't get across because it like the audio was screwed up. But one way or another, I'm in college. So yeah, like if you guys have been wondering why we haven't been releasing a lot of videos recently, like we released the tier list, and so that was kind of fun. But yeah, we use this formatting, and we're gonna have to be using this a lot more because I'm right now I'm like a 90-minute drive away, and it's gonna be it's gonna be difficult for us to do like videos that are like in person like reviews, but we'll try to get them out like as often as possible, like whenever I come back or like if we have vacation days. So yeah, but in the meantime, we're gonna try this out and like correspond. So there are a few movies that are like I'm really interested in, and I think that we could coordinate on that. I don't I think Joker's gonna be rated R. Is that right?
I think so. They're selling it as like a Martin Scorsese movie with the Joker in it.
Yeah, which in all honesty, hopefully it is. I've been hearing mixed things, sort of good. I like
I
this
have
is
a confession to make.
what?
I ended up finding a copy of the leaked screenplay and I read it.
What'd you think?
I think it's good. It's really going to be a matter of execution, but I think that the basic bones of the story were actually kind of an interesting. It's very Elseworlds. It's going to very
Yeah.
much not be a like this is how the Joker came to be. It's going to very much feel like a one shot story, which I think is interesting because there hasn't really been any like hey this is just a contained story that happens to have very popular comic characters in it.
Yeah, I'm so on that idea of like a story that's like different from the world or there, but I'm like still at the same time like that could make for a good story just so long as they execute it well. So yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know. There's some stuff like that that I'd love to see that we could coordinate together and watch like this, and then we'll just do this. So hopefully we can get some more with Gavin so that we can do all three of us again. But yeah,
Yeah.
so one way or another, this is we came here to talk about two separate movies here. So we watched I think we watched the Midsommar first because that was or actually I might have watched the Nightingale. I think I went out of my way one way or another. I remember A24 just out of nowhere dropped that they were releasing a director's cut into
Right.
theaters, and like I remember seeing the trailer
At
for
like
that.
a week's at like a week's notice.
Yeah, I'd heard that there was like an alleged NC-17 cut which had like a lot more stuff in it, and you can see if you watch the trailers, there's stuff which isn't in the theatrical cut which was in the trailers. So you're like, clearly there was a lot more footage. And I remember when they announced that, I was like, holy crap, I need to go right away. It was actually pretty close. It was in a theater near me, but and we also wanted to see Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale, so we're here to talk about both of those. So Midsummer first. It's curious. I think that the Blu-ray gets released like next month, and I'm wondering if they'll. I hope that they put the director's cut into the Blu-ray. But yeah, that. What did you think overall? I remember you said this right after the movie. We talked just briefly over the phone, and I remember you said like this is the first time you think you've seen a director's cut in theaters.
Yeah, I couldn't think of any other movie I had seen that was specifically a movie that I had seen a theatrical cut of, and then the director's cut later. Um,
Yeah,
and it was an interesting experience because there had been a very short period of time since I mean, what is it? I think you and I saw Midsummer. Was it maybe three times?
I saw it twice in theaters, and then I
Okay,
and so yeah,
got it. I think yeah. So I think I saw it twice, and yeah, we saw it twice in theaters, and then the third. Okay, so the third time is the director's cut.
yeah,
It was interesting. I think that what surprised me more than anything was not so much the extra footage that was in the movie, in terms of new scenes, but it was more in the changes to how they structured and sewed those scenes together.
yeah,
Like the editing is what I think stood out to me the most. Although there are, I would say, two critical scenes that were added to the director's cut that definitely changed certain elements of the movies in, I would say, interesting ways.
yeah. So first of all, before we get going here, like spoilers for Midsummer, like that I think we did a review on it already with Do we spoil it in that? We might have. I don't know. One
I
way or
think we
another.
did. It's a really hard movie to talk about
It
without talking
is
about the story because there's something very critical that happens at the beginning of the movie
exactly.
that makes it hard to talk about without giving away stuff that would be better to it would be better served to just see it in theaters.
So yeah, let's full spoiler warning. Definitely see Midsummer and see the director's cut if it's still in theaters. So yeah. Um. So what was your favorite part? Like that was additional. I think. Like what was your favorite bit that they added?
It was definitely the scene at night,
Yeah,
by the I guess it's by the
the lake.
riverbed
Yeah.
when they have this ceremony that it appears they are going to fling one of the village children into the water to drown.
Mhm.
And that was a very intense scene. I understand in some ways why they cut it because it almost immediately follows on to the very shocking cliffside scene that has some pretty horrific violence to it. So
Yeah.
when you're going into that next scene, your brain is sort of like already like traumatized, and you're kind of like, I was actually thinking they were going to kill a child there.
Yeah.
I was
Same here.
actually like thinking, oh wow, they're going to kill someone again. But I think that it was interesting. It was an interesting subversion that, like, I think what one of the characters says early on in the movie is that a lot of the ceremonies play like theater, and that felt very much like this very planned, very orchestrated, like carnival-esque kind of feeling to it. But that's not honestly my favorite bit. I like the fact that the scene was very intense, very upsetting initially, and then it sort of like is a release because that's not actually what happens. But what you and I talked about was the fact that that scene's inclusion is incredibly important for explaining how a character dies later.
Yes.
Something that the theatrical cut really uh, essentially leaves completely off screen, and it's not really clear what happens in the theatrical cut.
Yeah,
But this makes it very clear that that character was drowned, very similar to how this scene played out, but not all the way.
yeah, because I remember watching that the first time in theaters, and like I remember seeing it the second time and hearing the screaming, and I was like, "Holy crap!" Like I didn't take as much attention to that the first time around. Like I didn't think much, even though I acknowledged it. Then the second time, I was like, "Holy crap! That's crazy." But I remember talking about this the first time, like, "What happened to her?" And like, you're like, "She drowned," and I'm like,
Right.
"Where?" And like, where did she drown? And that sets that up. So which
And you
was
want to know the
great.
funny thing? The only reason I knew she drowned is because Ari Aster said it in his Reddit Ask Me Anything.
Exactly. So it's a little confusing to watch the first time around, and that clears it up. And I remember talking about this. The other thing which I loved about that scene is it takes place at night, like
Yes.
clearly, and then right after that, you have the dream scene, which does take place at night. And I
Right.
remember watching that the first time, and I'm like, it's a dream because it's night, and it's like it felt a little more tangible this time around. I'm like, I like that they showed that like that scene actually did take place at night. It's funny because there's a lot more time covered instead of the director's cut. Like I remember like the two people who leave first. It's I think instead of the theatrical cut, it's like they leave the same day, but they make it clear that they leave the
Right.
second day in the director's cut. It's like
Yes.
there's a lot more time that the film covers, and it's just a way of like the film being edited down to be like a little snippier, but and they didn't
Hmm.
even take away all that much for like specific scenes. Like that's the big scene that they took away, the river scene. But
Yes.
other than that, like it's just bits of dialogue and like scenes which are longer, which like make the film a little bit more, it's extensive. So yeah,
Yeah, I think that the subplots that are expanded upon are the stuff with Christian conflicting with what's it's is it Josh who's doing his thesis on Midsommar?
maybe. Hang on, I'll look it up right now.
Because it's funny, I remember early on in the movie they sort of introduce all the characters by name to characters in the movie, and I think it was Danny, Christian, Josh, and Mark.
Yeah, it is
Those are
Josh.
like the yeah.
Yeah, they
So I remember like the subplot with Josh and I think more expanded upon, and I think for the better because in the
yeah,
initial cut, Christian I wouldn't say he's more likable, but I think that my feelings towards him were a little more neutral. The director's cut definitely plays up more of his uh, personality and how it can uh, be very. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. Like he essentially is dependent on other people for almost everything.
kind of leechy. Yeah, he like relies on other people exactly.
Right, and he sort of can be he sort it's to the point where it actually is almost leeching off of other people, and that's kind of what happens with Josh. He's essentially uh, stealing his idea for his own thesis, even though he doesn't actually necessarily care that much about it. He's just he's out of ideas, and he just decides, you know, I'm just going to steal this one. And I think that the critical scene that honestly, it's the only scene that I would honestly keep in the movie, the theatrical version. Even though I understand why it was cut, probably for time and for pacing, it's the river scene, not for the early part of that scene, which is essentially plays out a scene that you expect to end horrifically but doesn't. But it's the scene right after that where Danny and Christian have a very critical conversation in a field.
That was really good stuff. I think one of the reasons that might have been cut is it kind of like undercuts the fact that the jumping scene had happened before, which is probably why they kept it day right after that. But
Yes,
like I
and
think,
yeah,
but
and
yeah, like that's
I think it also takes too much time to get to when the British couple tries to leave.
Exactly. So you
Because
want to
it
maintain a little
feels
more
like it's
suspense.
been like way too long for them to be that angry, that like screw this, I'm out. And then it's like, well, you guys took your time.
Exactly. I was about to say, like, watching the director's cut, I was like, you guys were freaked out, and it was like, we got to get out of here right away. And then all of a sudden, it's like, then you went to bed and just stayed, and then you left. It was like, it was a little strange watching that. It was kind of like whiplash, but I was like, all right,
Right.
that's
Do you want to
that's
know something really interesting? I was doing some more digging into the background of this movie, and evidently the idea of the movie, at least in its bare bones fashion, was actually brought to Ari Aster by I think it was a film studio in Sweden, and they were essentially shopping around an idea for for all intents and purposes, a Swedish midsummer slasher movie where essentially like some kids would go to Sweden to attend a midsummer festival and they would get systematically picked off, kind of like an 80s horror movie. And
I actually think I watched that
initially,
interview with
right,
Ari Aster. Yeah.
and evidently Ari Aster was not interested in it at first, but when he started to marry that idea with this idea of a crumbling relationship, that had much more of an interest to him, and that's when he started to write the script.
Which I like. I know that he describes it as like a breakup movie, which you can say what you will about that, but it is an interesting angle that he went down. So
Right, but I think that's interesting is the director's cut. It really stood out to me that you can really see the foundation of a slasher movie at the core of it. It's essentially kind of like the Wicker Man in a way, with kind of some slasher elements, even though it's dressed up as a very different movie. And I would still say it doesn't feel like a slasher movie, but it definitely has some roots in that genre.
yeah, the second bit that honestly one the other scene like that, the river scene, I would definitely keep in the theatrical cut. The other scene which I really liked, which was just extended, it wasn't cut from the movie. It was the scene where you learn about a Christian talks to the woman longer. Like they're in the room and they sit down like across from each other. That scene was like longer instead of the director's cut, and they establish that like he was fully aware of what they wanted to do, like with the mating ritual. I
I
really
actually
thought,
liked that because it
yeah,
essentially tied back to the fact that he was willing to essentially do anything to get what he wanted.
exactly.
Like essentially, like almost transactional. Like he's very transactional with Danny and his relationship with her. Like basically taking away time with her is his way of trying to control her. Like when Danny wants to have that hard conversation with him early on, he's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go," and she's like, "No, no, no." And by the end of the conversation, she's like saying she's sorry, even though she was trying to get him to admit that he was wrong. So I was like, that's kind of interesting. Like he, instead of like saying, "What are you talking about? I'm not having sex with your 14-year-old, like whatever girl she is," he's like, "Can I have access without doing this?" And the
Exactly.
implication is no. If you want to write your book report, you're going to do this extremely twisted thing.
Exactly. Which I like that because that was one thing I remember. Because it's so funny. I talk about this a lot. There's a negative review which I've seen, which I disagree with. That he didn't like that that like they kind of paint Christian almost like he was the bad guy, even though he didn't really do much of anything wrong, which I disagree with, like at its core. But I like in the
Right,
director's cut they show that he wasn't like just drugged and then forced to do that. Like they broke it down to him. He knew what he was getting himself into, to a degree.
right.
So
But I would say this about that. I would say that in the theatrical cut, Christian is clearly emotionally not capable of being a good partner to Danny, and is essentially being cowardly by not breaking up with her. I think what's interesting about the director's cut is they lay more of a foundation for why he seems so cold and distant. And I think even though I leave the movie liking him less, I feel like he's more of a character. He has more flesh and He seems more like a real person, even though I dislike him more. That makes sense. Like
Yeah.
by adding more to him, it makes him, I think, less. It makes him more interesting, despite the fact that I find him more frustrating as a character. It's weird to say. Like I think that reviewer almost thinks that he seems to be looking at the character and saying, "You're a caricature. You're not a real person." So I feel like the director's cut does potentially not solve that problem, but at least make it less of a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. I there's a lot added in all honesty. Like I think I was talking to you about this. Like the thing that surprised me is there's a lot of scenes that like they don't even. It's not that they make them like incredibly longer, but there's just points where the editing. I remember saying this, like the editing's a little bizarre in the theatrical cut because clearly they cut the scene where the scene was supposed to be longer, and it was like they
Right.
I like seeing how scenes play out longer when you realize they were actually cut down. So yeah, those were the things.
Right.
Like there aren't many big scenes or set pieces that were added. Like really, the lake scene, that's the biggest scene, which is like full out cut from the film. But I'm like I liked just seeing the small bits that like stack up over time. So
Yeah. I liked the stuff with the villagers. Thought that it was nice to have time with them. Um, like like I remember when you and I went and watched The Wicker Man in theaters.
yeah,
Like it's pretty clear from the beginning of that movie that there is something very foul afoot, and these villagers are definitely in on something very sinister. Like the movie is not really trying to conceal that from you.
yeah,
And even though it kind of builds up to this big shocking Wicker Man moment at the end, it's not so much shocking that the villagers were in on something kind of twisted because of the way they play it. I feel like with this movie, the first time I watched it, the director had me fooled into thinking that these were actually decent people and there's nothing terrible going on. There's a point where that changes and it's very clear that
yes,
something horrible is going on, but it was kind of neat to see the director's cut where you have more scenes with the people and not just your like four lead characters, and they seem more fleshed out. I remember that I think there was an expansion of the scene when Josh is talking to one of the elders about their scripture,
yeah,
and it essentially like expands more upon like what is essentially the basis of their religion. And that was interesting because it brought up some interesting concepts, and you're kind of seeing it through Josh's eyes as like an academic, but at the same time you're like, holy cow, this is pretty crazy.
yeah. I agree. Like the villagers, like this is the thing. I remember saying this to you. Like I liked that they didn't feel like a cult in this movie. I like that they feel really like their culture feels understandable. It isn't like they're worshiping a god or like want something or like they're it's like everything that they do is based on their tradition and what they've come to believe. Like the whole cliffside thing. That isn't like something
Right.
which is like this like evil thing or that like they're doing for like some bizarre purpose. Like they believe that it's like kind of mercy for them. They have their reasonings. They have like understandable reasons for it. So yeah,
Right. Yeah, most a lot of cult movies I think fall into the trap of looking at them from outside of the situation. Like you're not really putting yourselves in those characters' shoes. So it was nice to see them seem like real people. Like I think honestly my favorite scene of the
wait,
around the
what?
totem pole.
I think you
Uh,
you
the
you got out there.
the dance sequence around the totem pole.
Oh yeah, that was great. I
Um, just how I don't know, just how full of energy and how strangely intense it was for a
yeah.
dance scene.
It's funny to see that. Like you're like this is just they're just dancing, but it's like it's almost like a war because they describe it that way. Like they were like put under a spell that they would dance until they died. So you're like, holy crap! It's like
Right.
when people fall, it's like wow.
That
It's
might be my favorite moment of the movie because like once you get to a certain point and the characters start like taking a taking a unknown certain concoction of drugs, things get very strange.
yeah,
But I think my one of my favorite moments of very surreal nature in the movie is when I think it's her, it's Danny, and like the last two dancers.
Yeah.
And they start talking, and Danny's like, "I can't speak Swedish," and all of a sudden, like you hear the other girl who is talking in Swedish saying, "What?" And they start like laughing because they
Yeah.
can like understand each other. And there's this great line where it says like, "We don't need to talk to understand each other. We're
I
dancing."
love that scene because you're like, holy crap. It's
It's bizarrely funny, and it just comes out of nowhere.
yeah, I love that. Man, I swear it's so funny. Like I've thought so much about this because I've seen a few different negative reviews. Like I like doing this when there's movies which I really love. I like seeing what the opposition thinks to like get a fuller perspective. And I'm like, I think the reason a lot of people dislike this movie is they think it isn't scary, which I can back up on because I understand why someone would feel the movie isn't exactly terrifying. It's kind of it's more atmospheric than it is like frightening, like something like The
Right.
Shining. It's similar in how it sets everything up, but it isn't quite as like it doesn't feel like something can happen in every time because a lot of the violence is off screen. But I'm like at the same time, I'm like I don't think I don't think a horror as funny as it is to say it, I don't think a horror movie necessarily needs to like be scary to be well made or like effectively put together. And I think there's a
Yeah.
lot that's fantastic in Midsummer. Like I honestly I don't know if I told you, but I watched the movie Shadow. Did I tell you about that? The I
Oh,
think
I think
Chinese
you
movie.
might have. Is that the samurai movie you told me about,
Yeah, yeah.
or is this different?
Honestly, that movie I think has it topped. That's probably my favorite movie of the year thus far. But
Mm,
Midsummer still is a second right now because I think this movie is just excellent on pretty much every level. I love it. I've seen it 3 times in theaters. That's more than I see most movies. Period in theaters. I think that was more
oh
than I watched
wow,
Endgame. It's a fantastic movie all around. So
nice. No,
la,
it's interesting.
last bit that I'm really curious on. I don't. Was there other things you wanted to talk about for the director's cut?
I just think that the fact that the movie it's interesting. Like I would still say I prefer the theatrical cut. I think that having it be a little leaner makes the surreal stuff more impactful. But I do like the fact that the director's cut has some of the most genuine moments with characters because
Yeah,
so much of the movie is not dealing with their problems, and sort of the Midsummer Festival is their way of kind of coping with a lot of stuff. I did think that the best part of the director's cut was you had moments like Danny and Christian in the field, and then Josh and Christian later talking about their thesis. Like you have these moments where characters were in direct conflict with one another, and that was interesting to see in the context of, oh, so this is a lot of stuff that was just sort of simmering under the surface in the theatrical cut, but it sort of explodes outward in the director's cut.
yeah. I I think you kind of just answered it just there, but like moment of truth is like if the director's cut comes out on Blu-ray, like which would you prefer to watch if you wanted to rewatch this movie?
Definitely the theatrical cut, but I would rewatch scenes from the director's cut. I think that it's an interesting experiment, but I think the theatrical cut as a movie is more interesting to watch. But I would definitely rewatch scenes from the director's cut, although I might not be inclined to watch the director's cut um, in terms of like, hey, I want to sit down and watch Midsummer again. Let's watch the director's cut. I would definitely feel more inclined to watch the theatrical.
Yeah, I'm honestly divided because I loved so much of what they added, which I felt made the film richer. I felt there was a lot more character work that was put into the director's cut that like the fact that it's not in the theatrical cut, I'm just a little bit like, oh, that's a shame. But at the same time, I think that the theatrical cut is like trimmed better. It feels a little bit more cohesive and like they knew exactly what they wanted. And
Right.
like it comes at the sacrifice of a little bit more additional. But I don't feel that the film is like incomplete or like you need to watch the director's cut to have the experience. Like the theatrical cut stands by
Yeah.
itself, even
The
though the
director's
director's
cut
cut
is for
adds.
people that watch the theatrical cut. like it and more.
Exactly. Yeah. It builds on the film a little bit, but again, the film isn't broken and it works by itself even without it. So, yeah,
Yeah,
great to
I
watch
agree
in
with that.
theaters. So yeah, the second movie up. This will be like a some odd movie review because this is so funny. I don't know how we're gonna put this all together, but we both watched Nightingale, right? So
Yep, Jennifer
um,
Kent. She made one of my favorite movies of probably the last 10 years, The Babadook.
I watched that recently for a horror cinema class I took, and like I loved it. It was a movie. Like I remember hearing so much about it, but I remember watching that movie. I was like, holy crap! Like I always say this, like it's always funny when you watch a horror movie and like I've seen some that I've been impressed by like how much suspense is generated, but there are others that I'm just like, this is just a really well made film. Like I don't even care so much about like how effective like some of the horror is. It's just this is a really well made movie.
Yes.
That's what Jennifer Kent makes. So curious on this one. Did you want to talk about spoilers? I'd honestly hate to because you know do you think it's similar to Midsummer, or it's hard to do that without spoiling stuff, or do you want to
I don't think that. I
kind of a
think actually
section?
think the opposite. I think Midsummer is hard to talk about it at all. I think this is a movie we can talk about without necessarily spoiling anything because
All
the
right.
basic premise is pretty simple. There's a young there's a young woman who's an Irish convict on the island of Tasmania, which is under control of the British government, and essentially something very terrible happens early on in the movie to her family, and she seeks revenge against the British officer responsible, um, as she traverses the Tasmanian wilderness with an Aboriginal tracker.
Yeah.
That's that's the basic premise, and I think we can talk in the context of that basic premise without giving anything away.
I agree. So we'll keep it to that for now. So what did you want to talk about first? I like what did you think overall, and it like the same thing we do with our movie reviews. What did you think as a whole?
I think overall the movie made me think it was going to go in one direction at first and ended up going a different direction. And initially, I didn't know how I felt about that, but at the end of the movie, I felt that it was a very rich experience and that I really liked the fact that rather than just being a straight revenge story, it felt like it was a broader story. It was essentially a period piece
Yeah.
about the world at that time on this little island off the coast of Australia, like kind of. And at the end, I think what was interesting is rather than about being about revenge, it was about trauma, like the impact of violence, like what violence does to you when it's directed at you, what happens to you when you direct violence at others. It was a much more introspective movie than I expected it to be.
Yeah. I this is the thing. I was kind of confused on what the movie wanted me to be. Like first of all, the first act, honestly, my thoughts in this movie remind me a lot of what I think of Hereditary as a whole because the first act of this movie for all intents and purposes I think is perfect. It's excellently put together. Like when I was watching it I was like this is directed by Jennifer Kent. Like the editing, like that's the thing that stood out to me the most instead of the Babadook is like scenes go by so fast. It's like Martin Scorsese, where it's like scenes mean something, but the movie has like so many scenes, and they all just stack on top of each other so perfectly. So that when I watched it, like I was like I loved the first act of the movie. It was top notch, and then after that, it's like the movie splits into several different things. It's a bit of a revenge movie. It's a bit of a movie that's trying to raise awareness of something that like happened in history that like not too many people know about, and
Mm-hmm.
it was also kind of about like finding like peace within yourself, and like it has a lot of different ideas, and I think I was talking about this like this thing that one of the things with the ending that frustrated me was it felt like they were taking the film in one direction and then in the other direction they almost like undid it. They like
Right,
chose let's do both. And I was like,
right.
what? I was like, I
Let's have our cake and eat it too.
exactly. So I felt I'm divided on the second and third acts, even though I think there's a lot of strength. But it's just I'm glad that the movie did something different. Like it's the setup for this movie is like a classic revenge film. It's something like Kill Bill where you'd expect to just tragedy happens at the beginning of the film. The rest is kind of like the action or the hunt, and then the end is like the final part. But it like there's a part like towards the middle of the film, and I think you're gonna know what I'm talking about here, where something like really just grotesque happens that like in any other movie about revenge it would be like a satisfying moment, but it feels the exact opposite. It feels like
Feels like
traumatic
be
and just
careful what you wish for, because that's
exactly.
ultimately what the audience has wanted the whole time. And
Yeah,
it happens, and you're left feeling, well, that
just
was awful.
yeah, just disgusted and just like this is not what it was supposed to be satisfying, but this that we get this
Yes,
instead. It's like I
I
love
think
that.
that might be the strongest thing in the movie is the giving the audience what they want, but not in the way they expect it.
Which is probably why I have more of a problem with the end of the film than I do with that, because for me that's probably like my second or third favorite scene in the movie. I thought that was like really well put together. There's so many scenes like that, and I have a little bit less trouble with the second act, but I would argue troubles with like some of it with being with filler, because I think you
Mm-hmm.
are a fan of like the whole period stuff that they go with and like how they construct like how they make it like kind of historical. I feel a lot of that's like subtextual, which it doesn't really influence the plot of the film, even though it's a part of like the setting. But I did like how they put that together. Like, what do you think about that stuff? Like in the second act that they put through.
Do you mean just in terms of like the way they dress the film to feel like it feels accurate to like the
Well,
1600s
some
time
of
frame?
the like the characters and like what they when they come across on the road, you might say, like how they interact with the people they come in contact with, and like obviously the conversations with between the woman and the tracker. Those are like what did you like those, or was that something that you would say is like the period piece stuff?
I would say the stuff with the period piece is the those two meet on the way, like
Yeah,
meeting
exactly.
the enslaved Aboriginals, meeting the couple who is
That
probably
was
the only other, like one of the only people that treats. Oh gosh, I'm completely blanking on the names of the main characters. Sorry,
I
can you help me out here?
I remember I looked this up the other time when you were talking about that. You
It's
couldn't.
Claire, and I'm completely forgetting his name now. It's a short name.
It
There's
is.
a name of his tribe, and that's what I remember, but I don't remember his name.
It's Billy.
Billy, thank you. Like that couple they meet late in the movie. Like he's probably one of like the man in that the like the man of the house is probably one of the only people to treat Billy with a certain level of dignity
I love
in the
that
whole
scene.
movie.
That scene was really funny, and it was really humane. Like I remember watching that. I was like,
Yes.
this feels like one of the few moments where you can just breathe. And like his reaction at the end is like so good. That was like a really good part of it. So
Yeah. I would
yeah,
say that I loved seeing Claire and Billy open up to one another.
yeah,
Like they both carry a tremendous amount of pain and a tremendous amount of trauma. And the emotional arc of the movie is those two coming to terms with their own trauma through opening up to one another.
yeah. Because that was what I liked. They were butting heads at the beginning because both of them like had views of each other based on just like what they've been through in their life, and then they come to realize like we don't share much in common, but we both like hurt. We both have like bad things we're trying to overcome, and they connect through that. Even though they don't get
Right.
along, like I think beginning to end they don't really get along. But I loved how they come to understand each other more. That was the best part. So
Yeah. One of
yeah,
my favorite things about like kind of calling back to like giving the audience what the way they expect it. One of my favorite moments was when Claire finally calls Billy by his name.
yeah,
Like that was something that I knew was going to happen at some point, but I was very satisfied by the way they finally accomplished that.
yeah. I
Yeah,
okay. Is his name?
let me talk because I think that was
Wait,
something that we were
talk
talking
what?
about. We'll talk generally, not specifics.
Yeah,
I agree that the ending. does feel like it's trying to have its cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Um, I think the strongest scene in the movie is the scene of extreme violence and the opposite feeling of satisfaction when a scene of revenge happens. That's probably one of the strongest scenes of the movie, especially for Claire.
Hmm.
Um, However, I think the last shot of the movie is has been one of the images that stuck with me the most in terms of like how it just is a perfect way to conclude those two characters' stories. I thought that even though they went through the okay, we're going to have our cake and eat it too, it led to a very impactful final scene.
Yeah, I can get by that. Like I like I said, like my trouble with like kind of the relationship stuff is that it feels like it doesn't influence the direct plot, and then at the end they kind of say that's kind of the point of the movie. But like I'm confused at some points on what the point is, because like I said, I almost feel the through line of the film, like it based on like everything that's in it, is kind of like dealing with pain and like trying
Mm-hmm.
to find a way to like get past it or like or defeat it. And I think that it just comes down to like when you find a way to like accept it within yourself, which is why I liked the first part of the ending more than the second part, because it felt like the second part was like almost betraying what was the first part was, because this is the whole thing. I remember because I compared it to Hereditary, and like I've told you about this. What I don't like about the end of Hereditary is it feels like they fade away from what made the first part
Right.
so terrifying and so emotionally impactful. It's like the inside of this, I felt like they did something similar, but I think to better effect. Where it's like this, it's like I liked the first part so much, and it wasn't like the second part's a betrayal, but it felt kind of easy, not so much cheap or not like betraying the previous parts of the film, but it felt like you didn't need that. So, which again, it's not like that was detrimental to the film. But for me, that was just something which kind of took the edge off. So,
Right. I think that maybe the reason why that point the movie stops becoming a simple personal story and becomes something broader, becomes more of a an exploration of that world. Like, what was it like for the island of Tasmania to go colonization for all intents and purposes?
mhm.
Um, and so I think that might be one of the reasons why it feels that way. I think that I'm trying to think the best way to describe it. I think that there are some moments when the personal gets overtaken by the broader, so
Yes, that's
societal story. Um,
that's probably the best way
I'm
I
trying
can.
to think how I feel about it. I don't think it bothers me that the societal story is there because I think it
No,
leads to
it
some of the most powerful moments in the movie.
absolutely like
But
one of
I
the
do agree that that story slows down the personal one.
exactly
And that can be frustrating as an audience member because you're like, damn it, I want revenge now.
well, it didn't even need to be revenge. I just wanted the entire film to stick with the idea of like what the characters are going through, because the setup at the beginning seems to follow the girl and the is it Claire, and it's Claire, right?
Yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, Claire and the British officer. Like if it cuts back between the two of them, and I was like, okay, this is what the story is going to be about. The entire thing is going to be like both of them, and then eventually their roads cross. But they do, and then it's almost like the film just like kind of dissolves. It becomes several things after that, which I was like, oh, that's a little bit of a
Right.
shame, but still,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not like my trouble with Hereditary, and the reason I think that film like has worse writing is because it like the second half is almost like at like it's almost like
It's a completely different
yeah, it's like the two of them are
as opposed to like one movie kind of being threaded into another part of
Yeah.
the into another story.
It'd be like if two things collided. It's like you have it's a start at the beginning, everything's smooth, and then you get mixtures, and then towards the end it just becomes something completely different. So it's like, yeah, this one, I feel like things flow, but I think it could have been a little bit more focused. Even though I did think
Right.
that it was really effective what they did to put things together. So yeah,
Yeah, that's fair. I can get on board with that. I think it's strange. Like I don't disagree with anything you've said. I think that the emotionally the movie worked for me, even though from a story perspective I can see that they had to really thread the needle with, okay, how do we handle this personal story and the broader societal story that's being told in a way that feels genuine. Like I think the reason that I liked the movie so much is oftentimes with a movie like this, like I think the movie that I would most directly parallel it to is The Patriot, the Mel Gibson movie. It's a
yeah, I
and
remember
work
you
with me on
describing it
this.
this
Like
way. Yeah, it was a good comparison.
that's a movie that ultimately does something similar, where you have a personal story, you have this personal story of revenge with Mel Gibson, his son, and everything going on with that, and then in the broader context, the American Revolution. And ultimately that's a movie that gives you everything you want the way you want it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I like the it's got some really good performances and some cool scenes in it. But I think that the challenge of a movie like is the movie asks you to feel outraged at the violent actions of the villain while overlooking the same violent actions of the hero.
Yeah,
And I did appreciate the fact that this was a movie that not only fully humanized both the heroes and the villains of the story, but I felt it gave equal attention to how violence impacts all the characters, regardless of who's doing it, and regardless of who, for all intents and purposes, deserves or not. I think that the movie was very mature in how it handled that.
yeah, I'd agree. It's funny. I remember I maybe I set my expectations a little too high, but I remembered I'd read so much that like Jennifer Kent like had gone out of her way to avoid big projects. Like people like offered her projects out loud like out the other end because of the success of the Babadook, and she rejected them. She's like, I want to make my movie, and I was like,
Right,
that's awesome. But watching it, I was a little bit like, it could have been a little more polished, but I still do think it was really well put together, and like you said, mature. That's the best way to describe it. It's not like violence or like the plot of events feels like simplistic or just like something that you've seen before. It feels like something that you've seen before, but in a way that you haven't usually seen it. That
right.
was the thing I liked the most. So, yeah. Were there any other things you wanted to talk about with it, or most of it? Yeah.
Uh, I think maybe just honestly, like I really loved all the performances in the movie.
Oh
I
yeah.
thought that the actress who played Claire was very great. The actor who played Billy, the actor who played
Is it Sam Claflin is his name or
I think it's Sam Clifton is the actor who
Clifton?
plays the. He was
Really?
sort of fascinating in the movie because he had a story. He had a
Yeah.
story you could dedicate a movie to.
Exactly.
Um,
It wasn't like they just made him the target for revenge or anything like that. You're like, this person is a terrible human being, but you're like, I
yes,
get how he got to this position, and I get why he's here. It's not just like they made him to be this way, or like that he's evil by nature. It's like he has reasonings, even if you don't like him or empathize with him in any way. It's just they did give him origins, so which was great. So
right. No, it's absolutely. I have a lot of respect for the fact that the movie took time to flesh out every character, even smaller characters. There's a there's this young boy that is
oh man.
serving the British officers who are traveling through like the wilderness of Tasmania to get to a certain location. and he has a story. He's sort of this like very what's the word to put him? Very rascally sort of fellow that doesn't really take crap from anyone, and he has a story of like Sam Clifton sort of taking him under his wing. It was interesting. Like every character, even the smaller, even the ones with smaller roles, they all feel very tactile.
Yeah. Is same with the old tracker. I remember you and I were talking about him. Like he
Yes,
had a really great scene towards the middle of the movie. Like I
one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie.
yeah, that was that was one of those satisfying moments. But again, like it's just yeah, there's a lot. Like it's so funny. Like I don't want to undersell this movie. I don't want to like I would definitely recommend people see it, but it's not that I think it's poorly put together. It's just those things that just I think could have made the movie just that extra mile more. But it's a
Right.
solid film. It's really well made. So yeah, you
Yeah,
know
it's ultimately, I think, whether whether you think the movie works as a whole, there's so much to appreciate about the movie. If you like the Babadook, you would like this movie.
yeah, like character centralized like traumatic horror. That's
Yeah.
that's 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 what Jennifer Kent did inside of the Babadook, and that's what she does here. It's like she
Yep.
understands what she wants to make
No, I
movies on.
agree.
So yeah, great. I can like impose those in, but I did you have any idea of a grade that you wanted to give it?
That's a good question. I hadn't even thought about that. I
Do
think
you,
I'd probably call this an A minus.
mm,
At the end of the day, it was a very emotionally satisfying movie, and it felt very rich. And I was very glad to have seen it when it was still in theaters.
all right. I'd give it a B. I again, it's like my it's not that I felt that the movie was poorly made. I just have those small things which I think drag the film down just a little bit. I feel there's stuff which they added which is kind of not like I said, not in opposition, but kind of weighs the rest of the story down, unfortunately. And I think if you'd cut those out, it could have made the film a little bit smoother. Even though I think
Right.
what you have there is still like really well made and put together. I think there was just those little things which could have made all the difference more. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, sounds good. So yeah. Those are Midsummer and the Nightingale. Those I remember describing this to you. It's like I'm in college now, and I was like, wow, like that. Those are great movies to like get your friends to go out and watch with you. It's like two just screwed up movies that like no one's gonna want to see with the group because it's like freaking disgusting. It's like yeah, but as
Movies to watch with your parents.
so yeah, we can pick some more stuff later on out. I was telling this to you, Dan. I've watched I told Gavin we should watch One Punch Man to have a bit of a podcast like this on, and I still don't think he's seen any of those. I finished that, and you and I
Yeah,
you still want to watch True Detective, right?
I do. I honestly, it's funny. Like I almost felt like I need to watch season one and two again.
Yeah,
It's just been a
I
while.
honestly want to rewatch season one. I was thinking, I remember saying this. I was thinking about doing a video on like one which a season which I like or something which I loved. Like I do a lot of like on my personal channel. I do a lot of videos that are kind of like break down stuff like and like flaws with films and how you can improve films. But it's like I want to make stuff that are on videos which I think are really well made and I need to figure out a way to do that like more efficiently. Even though like I'm like yeah I know how to do particular stuff,
Right.
but yeah like True Detective season one it's so freaking solid. So yeah I finished season one of that and I also watched The Boys. So you could go either way, but yeah like we should plan out some more stuff like particularly movies. I think I it's so funny. It chapter two like I not many people are talking about it. Like I think most people are saying it's a little bit of a disappointment. Unfortunately, I've heard it's decent though, right? Or
What is it?
it chapter two.
I think my roommate saw it. And I think he said it was good, but it was definitely a step under. the first one. So
Yeah, which is okay. I mean, the first one is really good. I wasn't expecting like a perfect sequel, but it's like I'd still be interested to see that, I guess. And yeah, so Joker's coming out.
right.
There's a few movies which ought to be interesting to see. So yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree.
all right. Well, thanks for doing this, Tan. And if you guys are listening in, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, this is kind of what we're stuck with until I can come back for vacation and we can do something like an in-person review. But yeah, until then, we'll try to get as many of these out as we can, and hopefully we'll just see some movies in conjunction and talk about them after. So, all right,
Yeah,
thank you guys for
awesome, man.
listening. This
Good to talk
is
to you.
yeah, Three Brothers Movie Podcast on OBS streams. So yeah, all right, I'm gonna close out. So thank you guys for listening.
See you guys.
See ya.